and the mechanic never meant to touch her. One slip from a ladder, one terrified grab for balance, and his hand landed on the cold scales of a dying dragon princess. The royal chamber froze. Her guards raised their weapons. Her father, the emperor himself, stepped forward in disbelief, because under the human's trembling palm, the impossible happened. Her decaying scales glowed gold, her pulse strengthened, and the royal family warriors feared across 200 star systems, gasped like they had seen a miracle. Or a threat. Who was this human, and what had he just awakened? If this beginning hooked you even a little, hit like. It tells the algorithm you enjoy sci-fi stories like this. And if you want more HFY-style worlds, mysteries, and heart-pounding encounters every week, consider subscribing. Share the video with someone who loves accidental hero stories. Alright, ready to dive deeper? Jake Morrison had repaired so many ships that the smell of coolant and burnt wiring felt more familiar than fresh air. Frontier Station Epsilon wasn't glamorous. It wasn't important. Honestly, calling it Frontier was generous. It was the kind of place the galaxy forgot about, where old freighters came to die and mechanics like Jake came to make rent. If you kept your head down, fixed what needed fixing, and didn't ask questions, you could survive. And survival was all Jake ever aimed for. He was halfway inside a coolant manifold when the first tremor hit light at first, the kind that made loose tools rattle. But the second tremor wasn't light, it was bone deep. It made the entire docking bay shudder like something massive had slammed into the station. Bolts groaned above him. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The alarm began wailing in a tone Jake had heard only once before, back when a transport ship came in with its engines literally on fire. Jake slid out from under the freighter, wiping grease on his jumpsuit as mechanics sprinted toward the bay windows. "What now?" he muttered, joining them. He didn't expect to see a ship that ship. It wasn't crashing so much as limping, trailing sparks and smoke like celestial blood. Plates of radiant gold armor reflected the station lights through the debris. And even damaged, it looked impossibly elegant. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, That's a Draith Imperial vessel." Jake's stomach dropped. The Draith Empire didn't visit Outer Rim repair stations. They didn't visit anywhere. They summoned people. They commanded. They were 8-foot apex predators covered in armored scales and ancient military pride. Their royal vessels were symbols of absolute power. So why was one descending like a wounded beast? The intercom rackled, all maintenance personnel to Bay 7 immediately. "This is not a drill." Jake didn't even have time to swear. His supervisor, a four-armed Terran with a temperament like a rusted saw, grabbed him by the collar. "Move, Morrison. And don't screw anything up. These people start wars over dirty looks. Bay 7 was chaos." Draith Royal Guards stormed out of the damaged ship, towering, armored, weapons drawn. Their language rumbled like mountains grinding together. Station Commander Phillips, usually calm as ice, was sweating through his uniform while trying to coordinate with what looked like the royal officer in charge. The tension in the air felt thick enough to chew. "The Crown Princess is aboard," Phillips announced, voice trembling. "Her life support is failing. If we don't fix it, the Empire may consider her death an act of sabotage." Nobody needed that translated. Jake was assigned to the medical bay's environmental systems, not ideal, but better than crawling inside plasma vents. A guard marched him through ornate corridors far too beautiful for a starship, polished stone, real wood, ancient banners woven with gold. But all of that bounty dissolved when they entered the medical bay. It was freezing cold enough to sting, and the room buzzed with machines Jake didn't recognize. In the middle stood a massive stasis pod, its surface frosted over. Through the icy glass he saw her, Princess Valera. Even dying, she looked like a creature carved from power itself. Deep violet scales, sharp angles, a regal stillness, even in stasis. Around her, royal physicians and guards hovered anxiously, and behind them, Jake's breath caught, the Emperor, enormous, silent, wearing battle-scored armor like it was casual clothing. Jake swallowed hard. All he had to do was fix the environmental conduits. No pressure. He set up his ladder and climbed toward the overhead systems. The wiring was a mess. Someone had tried an emergency reroute and almost caused a total overload. Jake steadied his breathing. Find the problem. Fix the problem. Ignore the giant aliens who could break you in half. He disconnected a miswired conduit, reached for another, and his boot slipped. Time slowed. He fell backward, arms flailing, catching nothing but air, until his hand found something warm, not metal, not the ladder. Skin, scale, his palm pressed directly against the prince's exposed forearm through an emergency access gap in the stasis field, and everything stopped. A roar of weapons unsheathed behind him. Guards surged forward. The Emperor's eyes widened, just barely, but enough to chill Jake's bloodstream. Jake yanked his hand back. I didn't mean, I slipped, I swear. But before any of them could kill him for touching royalty, a physician shouted, "Her vitals look!" Monitor spiked. Lights flashed. A golden shimmer spread beneath the princess's scales where Jake had touched her. It pulsed once, twice, growing brighter. "Impossible," the physician whispered. "Cellular degradation is reversing," weapons lowered. Not entirely, but the hesitation saved Jake's life. The Emperor stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. "What?" he said, each word like cracking stone. "Did you do to my daughter?" I don't know," Jake stuttered. "I was falling, I grabbed the wrong thing. I'm sorry." "Her vitals continue to rise," another physician called. "This is unprecedented." The Emperor stared at Jake like he was a riddle carved into fate itself. Then, "Seize him," gently. Hands grabbed him, not cruel, but firm. His toolkit clattered to the floor. For the first time in months, the monitors surrounding Princess Valera showed improvement. Jake Morrison, a mechanic from nowhere, had accidentally triggered something the galaxy didn't even believe was possible, and his ordinary life ended in that moment. They didn't throw him into a prison cell. Instead, they placed him in a medical observation room, bright lights, scanners pointed at him, guards outside. Draith physicians ran test after test. Blood samples, genetic scans, something that felt like it counted every atom in his body. He sat there, head spinning, replaying the moment again and again, the warmth of her skin, the glow, the way her vitals surged. Eventually an elder physician approached, scales dark with age. "Human," he said, studying Jake with disturbing intensity. "Do you know what you are?" Jake blinked. "A mechanic?" "A very confused mechanic?" The elder shook his head. "No, you possess a biological anomaly, one never recorded in humans. Your cells produce a bioharmonic frequency perfectly tuned to counter our princess's decay, by pure cosmic accident. You are the only being who can heal her." Kess stared. "Me? That's impossible." The elder gestured toward the readings. "Impossible things do not care whether you believe in them." Moments later, Jake was summoned to the Emperor's chamber, a place built to intimidate, lined with relics of conquered worlds. The Emperor towered over him. "You will remain on this vessel," he declared. "You will continue treatments. My daughter lives because of you. Her fate, and perhaps the Empire's now, rests in your hands." Jake swallowed. "What happens if I say no?" The Emperor's gaze was steady. "Then you violate a treaty your species signed decades ago, and you will not like what follows." Jake exhaled slowly.
So this was his life now. A mechanic, a mistake, a miracle, and the only hope of a dying princess whose name he had barely learned. The first treatment felt like sitting beside a storm he didn't understand. Jake's hand pressed gently against Princess Valera's cold forearm, while the medical bay hummed with scanners and distant alarms. The golden glow returned the moment their skin made contact, warm, pulsing, alive. It wasn't painful, but it was intense enough that it made the hairs on Jake's arms rise. Like touching a live wire that didn't hurt, but demanded respect. For an hour, he sat there, feeling his arm vibrate at a frequency he couldn't explain. The princess lay still, unconscious but fighting, her breath steadying with each pulse of light. By the time Elder Torvak ended the session, Jake felt as if he'd run 10 miles uphill. 7% improvement. The Elder announced, barely concealing awe. "Your effect is accelerating." Jake leaned back, suddenly exhausted. "Great. Fantastic. Happy to help. Where's the nearest bed before I pass out?" They gave him quarters, not a cell, not luxury, but private. The bed was too firm, the air too heavy, the lighting too bright. He didn't complain. He slept as soon as he hit the mattress. And then the routine began. Wake, eat food that tasted faintly metallic, endure stares from Draith crew who didn't know whether to bow or snarl, and then walk in the medical bay where his day revolved around touching the princess and hoping his body didn't do something catastrophic. By the third day, he could recognize every beep of the machines. By the fifth, he could anticipate Torvak's instructions before the elder even opened his mouth. By the seventh, Princess Valera woke up. It was subtle at first, her fingers twitching, lids fluttering, vitals spiking. Then, suddenly, her amber eyes opened fully, blazing like molten gold. The guards reacted instantly, bowing low, weapons lower but ready. Torvak rushed to adjust her stasis field. Jake froze. She looked around the room, assessing everything, walls, monitors, faces, until her gaze landed on him, and stayed there. Ooh! Her voice was sharp, regal, rough from disuse. Dares touch a member of the royal bloodline? Jake tried to speak, failed, cleared his throat, and tried again. Hi. Jake Morrison. Mechanic. I slipped? Long story. Torvak stepped forward quickly. Princess, he is a human whose bioharmonic frequency reversed your condition. Without him, you would not be awake. Her eyes narrowed, studying him like a puzzle. A human? She said it with equal parts curiosity and disbelief. Unexpected. Prince Kaler, who had been hovering like an anxious shadow, let out a breath of relief. Sister, your recovery. She ignored him entirely, still focused on Jake. And you? Why did you do it? Why touch me? I didn't mean to, Jake said honestly. I fell. It was an accident. A very weird accident. A flicker of something, maybe amusement, crossed her expression. Honesty, how refreshing. From that moment, everything changed. Valera's treatments continued daily, but the princess now stayed awake, watching everything with sharp awareness. At first, the silence between them felt heavy, awkward. Jake kept his eyes on his shoes. She kept hers on him, studying him like some ancient prophecy had walked into her room wearing a dirty jumpsuit. But silence, especially forced silence, never survives long. Tell me about Earth, she said during the night treatment. Jake blinked. Earth? Why? You are the first human I have ever met who did something impossible. I wish to understand your kind. He told her about mining colonies, improvised repairs, learning by necessity, losing his home, teaching himself engineering through scraps and manuals he found in abandoned stations. He expected her to look down on all of it. She didn't. You survived chaos by becoming adaptable, she murmured. Very human. The next day, she asked about his hobbies. The day after, about his family. Then, finally, about fear. What do you fear most, Jake Morrison? Falling off ladders, he said without thinking. She laughed. A real laugh. Deep, surprising, warm. He realized he liked making her laugh. But their fragile, growing connection wasn't the only thing shifting. The ship itself felt different now. Draith crew who once scowled at him now nodded in measured respect when he walked by. Some whispered. Some stared. A few bowed, causing Jake to nearly walk into walls every time. Others weren't thrilled, especially Prince Kaler, whose resentment radiated off him like heat. That a human maintenance worker holds my sister's life in his hands is absurd. The prince muttered once, not quietly. Jake pretended not to hear it. Arguing with an 8-foot warrior prince wasn't on his bucket list. Still, even Kaler's attitude shifted after a string of unlikely events. It began with a clogged atmospheric recycler. Jake noticed a stale air in the bay before anyone else. A quick scan confirmed a blockage in the secondary filtration line. He mentioned it casually to Torvak. Within minutes, 3 Draith engineers were inspecting the machinery, dismissing Jake's suggestion before he finished speaking. This is Draith engineering, growled the lead engineer, far beyond human understanding. Let him try, Valera said from her pod. Silence fell. The engineers exchanged looks of horror, but nobody dared defy a recovering princess. Jake shrugged, grabbed his tools, and got to work. 4 hours later, The recycle was running at near-perfect efficiency. The lead engineer stared at him like Jake had swallowed a manual whole. The system performance increased by 40%. Jake scratched his neck. Yeah, your tertiary bypass was undersized. Easy fix. Word spread. The human healed the princess. The human fixed the recyclers. The human understood their sacred engineering systems. Respect took root. So did resentment and curiosity and something dangerous. Because only 3 weeks into his involuntary royal residency, Jake's life nearly ended. He was working alone in a medical bay late at night, tinkering with a damaged power coupling because he couldn't sleep when a faint scraping sound broke the silence. The vents. Something moved inside them. At first, Jake thought it was a malfunctioning fan. Then the vent cover exploded outward. A Draith assassin dropped into the room, eyes gleaming, holding a device that pulsed an ominous red. Jake didn't think, just acted. He grabbed the nearest object, a diagnostic scanner, and threw it with everything he had. It slammed into the assassin's arm, sending the device skittering across the floor. The assassin snarled and struck Jake in the face, hard enough to drop him. Jake tasted blood. "Guards!" he yelled, voice cracking. "Intruder!" The fight was brutal, swift, messy. Guards stormed in and tackled the assassin before he could retrieve his weapon. Jake staggered to his feet, head throbbing. The human saved her life, a guard reported moments later, checking on Valera's pod. He risked himself without hesitation. Princess Valera, awake and watching, turned her fierce gaze on Jake. "You place your body between danger and me. Why?" Jake pressed his sleeve to his bleeding nose. "Because you're not just the princess anymore. You're a person, my friend. I couldn't just let someone hurt you." Her expression softened, just slightly. "Humans," she murmured, "burn brightly, even when you fear the dark." That night, something in her changed. Something in him did too. But the next morning, Elder Torvak brought news that chilled the room. Jake's healing ability was weakening. His cells were adapting, building natural resistance to his own bioharmonic output. They had 2 weeks before the treatments stopped working entirely. Princess Valera reached for his hand. Publicly, deliberately. "Then," she whispered, her voice steady despite everything, "we make every moment count." The countdown began the moment Torvak delivered the bad news. 2 weeks. That's all Jake had before his body built enough resistance to his own healing frequency that Princess Valera's recovery would stall again. He'd saved her life once. Saving it a second time, that would require a miracle or a new idea, which was how Jake found himself thinking harder than he'd ever thought about anything. He watched every reading, every fluctuation in the golden glow during treatment, every micro shift in Valera's breathing. He wasn't a doctor, but he was a mechanic, and mechanics learn by listening to the things other people ignored. "You're thinking too loudly," Valera murmured one session, eyes half closed but watching him all the same. "I'm trying to understand the pattern," Jake admitted. "Leave the pattern to those trained for it," Torvak muttered. Jake shook his head. "This isn't medicine. It's engineering." Torvak frowned. "Explain." Jake gestured around them. "If you run the same signal at the same intensity every single day, the system, my cells, adjust. That's how stress fractures happen in machines. Predictable strain. Predictable failure." Valera sat up slightly. "You are saying we push your body too consistently." "Yeah, you're treating me like a stable power source." "I'm not. I need variation. More intense some days, lighter others, different rhythms. Humans evolve for chaos. You evolve for consistency. That's why your sensors can't predict me." Valera gave him one of those looks, half admiration, half, "Why does this ridiculous human make so much sense?" Torvak gave him a different look entirely, half insulted, half intrigued. The Imperial Council argued for hours before they reluctantly approved Jake's variation protocol. And for 3 days, nothing much changed. Readings flatlined, resistance still rising. But on the 4th day, the golden glow brightened. And on the 5th, Valera's recovery spiked. 6%, 7, then 10. By the end of the week, she reached 89% recovery. Strong enough to stand. Strong enough to walk with assistance. Strong enough to leave stasis for short periods. Strong enough to terrify every political faction watching her progress. That was when war came knocking. The message arrived in a burst of static, an intercepted transmission from a Vraxian hegemony. Another empire, fierce, proud, unpredictable. Their empress was dying from the same degenerative condition that had nearly killed Valera. But they did not ask for help. They demanded Jake. And they backed their demand with a fleet of 30 warships heading straight for Draith territory. The Imperial Council chamber erupted into chaos. Every leader, every general, every advisor had an opinion, and none of those opinions considered Jake a person. He is a resource. He is an asset. He is one life weight against millions. Jake had never felt smaller, until Emperor Draxos turned to him. "You have a voice here," the Emperor said. "Use it." Jake wasn't a politician. He wasn't a commander. He was just him, a mechanic covered in scars and grease stains. But somehow dozens of alien leaders went silent, waiting for him to speak. "I didn't ask for any of this," Jake began quietly. "But if my life can stop a war, yeah, I'd give myself up." The chamber gasped. Even Valera's eyes widened. "But," Jake added, "none of this matters if people die because I wasn't brave enough to stand in the right place when it counted." Valera rose then, walking to the center of the chamber, still unsteady, still recovering, but carrying herself like the commander she was born to be. As second in line to the eternal throne, she declared, "I invoke Kethvara." A collective gasp went through the room. The ancient vow, the life bond, one invoked only when someone's life had been saved in a way that could never be repaid. "Kethvara binds my honor and my life to Jake Morrison," Valera said. "To surrender him is to surrender me. And if this council refuses to protect him, I abdicate my claim to succession." Pandemonium erupted. No royal had abdicated in 3,000 years. Draxos stared at his daughter, then at Jake, then back at the chamber. "You would give up your throne," he said slowly. "For a human, I would give up my throne," Valera answered. "For a person who risked everything for me without hesitating." Even Kaler had no response. In the end, Draxos stood and delivered a verdict that would shape galactic history. "We do not hand over those under Imperial protection. If the Vraxians want war, let them come." 3 days later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Imperial flagship, armored in a custom-fitted suit bearing the royal crest. The Vraxian fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm. 30 warships in tight formation, bristling with weapons. But they didn't face a frightened empire. They faced the full might of the Draith's 7th Fleet, 60 ships strong. The Vraxian commander appeared on the view screen, obsidian skin gleaming like polished stone. "Surrender the human," she said coldly. "Our empress is dying." For a moment, Jake felt the weight of 2 empires pressed down on him. Then Valera stepped forward. "We do not surrender lives," she said, "but we offer cooperation." Jake added, "Let me examine your empress. If I can help, I will, but not as property, not as a prize, as a person." Silence stretched, a long, dangerous silence. Then unexpectedly, "Agreed," the Vraxian commander said, and the war dissolved into negotiation. The joint medical team assembled 2 weeks later, Draith, Vraxian, and human specialists working together for the first time in history. When Jake examined the Vraxian empress, what he discovered stunned every empire. "This isn't a disease," he said, pointing to the molecular patterns. "These structures, they're artificial, ancient, a nanoweapon." Torvak's eyes widened. "Pre-Empire war technology." Valera finished the thought quietly. "Dormant, hidden for thousands of years, awakening only in certain genetic lines." Jake's frequency didn't heal the disease. It neutralized the weapon. His accident had revealed the key to stopping an ancient threat nobody even knew existed. And suddenly, this wasn't about saving one princess or one empress. It was about saving hundreds across dozens of species. 6 months later, The Harmonic Dawn, a joint research vessel, glided past a newborn star system. Jake stood at the observation window, watching the swirling light.